this time, I would like to introduce our speaker today, Hugh Taft-Morales, a cisgendered, heterosexual male, is going to speak to us about transgender progress.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Roland. Welcome, everybody. Hope you're all well today. So I'm going to speak about the progress and challenges of transgender activism in the United States, and I want to thank those friends and relatives of mine who have helped teach this cisgendered heterosexual male a little bit more about their story. And I want to admit some limitations on this. I'm only beginning to learn about the reality of living a transgendered life in this country. As a cisgendered heterosexual, meaning that I claim the gender identity that I was assigned at birth, and I'm attracted to people of the opposite gender. Being that, I'm never going to completely understand the journey of transgender individuals. I know some of the statistics about the horrible exclusion and intimidation and harassment and violence, and I read many articles, many of them sent to me by Nina. Thank you, Nina, for sending them to me. But I've only spoken to a handful of openly out transgender individuals in my life, and only a couple of them about this specific series of issues. But I think it's important, so I'm going to get started. And let's get ourselves a transgender platform speaker in the near future. Will we do that? Let's do that. What I can offer maybe is the beginning of a conversation that will help make this community of the Ethical Society or more welcoming and friendly one to our transgender friends and neighbors and relatives. There's this little bit of history. There's a flurry of media attention right now on transgender issues, about coverage of this on magazines, and it seems like a very contemporary American issue, but transgender individuals have obviously been around for a long time. In this country, the first documented case was in the 1600s of descriptions in Native American tribes of individuals that were considered important individuals. Often they were shaman or fortune tellers, and they still exist today. They're referred to by one author as two-spirited, marked not by a deficiency or a change or an aberration, but being of twice the spirit. Civil War soldiers, there are many stories of transgendered individuals in the Civil War, interestingly enough. And certainly there are stories throughout the world of transgendered individuals. The Kama Sutra, for example, mentions transgender individuals quite a bit. In contemporary America, there's this progress in visibility, certainly. I think that you have to understand that all of this publicity sometimes erases from the fact that for many transgender individuals, their journey is a very difficult one. It can be challenging financially and socially and medically. The process for transitioning is described by one transgender person as a confusing web of rules, harsh realities, tough choices, besides all the internal turmoil and self-realizations you have to go through to even begin consideration. Transitioning is an exhausted list of to-dos. There's transgender therapy because your gender feels like a confusing mess. And in many states you need a letter of recommendation from a qualified gender therapist to begin hormone replacement therapy, as I did. Therapy isn't typically covered by health insurance in this country. Hormone replacement therapy is thrilling and confusing and scary and reaffirming. It's cruel for me to wake up every day and say, oh shit, something is happening. But the process is pretty grueling too. So it's grueling. And at the same time, we have all these magazines and films out of Hollywood, The Danish Girl, The Dallas Buyers Club, Transparent, that's pushing this discussion to the forefront of American culture. And this is a good thing, isn't it? I'm going to revisit that question in a little bit. Because personally, I was glad to see President Obama, after some initial hesitation, take on this issue. The Equal Employment Opportunities Commission was directed to rule that anti-transgender bias was a form of sex discrimination covered by Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. For the first time in American history, the term transgender was included in a State of the Union address. Obama said that because of America's respect for human dignity. We condemn the persecutions of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people. The President banned discrimination against transgender employees of the federal government. And this past May, Attorney General Loretta Lynch, wow, she took on North Carolina's harassment and discrimination against transgender individuals. She spoke movingly and directly to transgender people. You haven't heard the speech, hear it. Here are some words. Some of you have lived freely for decades, is our Attorney General. Others of you are still wondering how you can possibly lead the lives you were born to lead. But no matter how isolated or scared you feel today, the Department of Justice and the entire Obama administration wants you to know that we see you. We stand with you. And we will do everything we can to protect you going forward. Please know that history is on your side. History was made 4 years ago when a young Sarah McBride was the first out transgender person working in the White House. Then this past summer, as National Press Secretary for the Human Rights Campaign, she became the first openly transgender person to speak before a major party convention. Currently in California, they're working to ensure equal participation for transgender students in public school life through the School Success and Opportunity Act, because too often transgender children are excluded from activities because they don't fit the traditional boxes. Laverne Cox, the LGBTQ activist best known for her role in Orange is the New Black, is now the first openly gender person to be represented in Madame Tussauds Wax Museum. I would have thought that would have happened earlier, actually. In May of 2014, citing Cox's success, Time magazine on the cover suggested that maybe we had gotten to a transgender tipping point. And just this past summer, a federal judge ruled that Army veteran Jamie Shoup can legally be classified as Shoup wanted to be. Not as male or female, as non-binary, as neither male or female. Shoup said, "It feels amazing to be free from a binary sex classification that inadequately addresses who I really am, a system in which I felt confused." So Shoup's example teaches us that a major element in gender stereotypes in this country is the binary and essentialist notion of gender. And years ago, my son Sean helped me understand how the binary nature of our language and habits of thought dominate and distort human experience. Now, I've got to tell you something about Sean. This is a young man who's now 29, who I described in his high school graduation speech when I was speaking there as an artistic, rock-climbing, cross-country running, dumpster diving, volunteer medic, vegan punk, anarchist, free-spirit, computer geek with pink-tinted dreadlocks. So he has taught me a lot. Sean helped me understand that for so long our Western culture has been dominated by this assumption that regarding orientation, who we are attracted to, or identity, who we self-identify as, we're stuck in this binary thinking. We've been taught to think that there's only two genders, male and female. We've been taught that we're attracted to either men or women. And as Sean and many others have explained, this binary dichotomy in identity and orientation does not match their experience. Rather than only two opposites to choose from, some experience more of a spectrum that spans traditionally male and female characteristics. Some like the term gender fluid, in which someone's identity over time can change from male to female or female to male or neither or both. Identity and orientation and interests and behavior can all be appreciated as a more flexible things that are better represented by the diversity of human experiences if we learn new ways of thinking. One Australian actress named Ruby Rose said, "Gender fluidity is not feeling like you're at one end of the spectrum or the other. For the most part, I don't identify as any gender. I'm not a guy. I don't really feel like a woman, but obviously I was born as one. So I'm somewhere in the middle, which in my perfect imagination is like having the best of both sexes." Now, for some time, Sean has identified as genderqueer, which, like gender fluid, denies this rigid binary categories that limited his experience of himself and his life. And maybe this liberation from antiquated language and modes of thinking has brought us to the transgender tipping point. But we have to appreciate that all this visibility we're seeing has produced a backlash, as often happens. Conservative forces have used the public conversation on transgender issues to drive a wedge into the political spectrum. And this year, the RNC has been using it to energize their base. They're using it to scare people who don't understand transgender issues or people into voting for intolerant candidates all over the country, up and down the ballots. The recent bathroom controversy is a perfect example. I mean, the dangerous myth that transgender women, or people claiming to be, are stalking cisgendered women in bathrooms has whipped up ignorance and paranoia. And North Carolina's House Bill number 2 is an example of this LGBTQ-phobic legislation, which, quote, eliminates anti-discrimination protections for gay, bisexual, transgender, genderqueer, and intersex people. Now, intersex people are people generally born with a reproductive sexual anatomy that doesn't fit the traditional male or female. Sometimes they have elements of both. But Bill number 2 legislates that, quote, in government buildings, individuals may only use restroom and changing facilities that correspond to their sex on their birth certificates. Well, importantly, cisgendered allies have had to face the fact that all the visibility that we like to say is a great thing has put transgender people in greater danger, ironically. A couple of years ago, a transgender person might slip into a bathroom that they would be scolded for today, but now there's a spotlight on them. And it's increasing harassment. I couldn't believe it when I heard that Kansas recently proposed a law, I don't think it passed, where students were able to sue the school system if they reported to the school and it was verified that somebody used the wrong bathroom. They could sue the school district for $2,500. I mean, that's like putting a bounty on finding somebody cheating in the bathroom game. In California, chairman of Jelly Belly, the jelly bean company that is everywhere, is attacking a law to protect LGBTQ students in schools. He is financing a hateful fringe campaign, guilty of, as one reporter puts it, trafficking in lies and the new law and terrorizing our youth. The Tennessee House passed a bill allowing therapists to refuse mental health services to LGBTQ people, violating every ethical standard of that profession. So while Caitlyn Jenner might find it okay to navigate the current visibility, elites are protected from most harassment. Less influential transgender people can often suffer more concretely from day-to-day harassment. As Sean put it, visibility doesn't inherently equal safety. Arthur Schuon, in an article in Salon magazine, explains that not only is there a right-wing backlash, but there's a mainstream lack of appreciation about this. That with visibility alone, without the legal or social supports, life can get more difficult. So when I left seeing The Danish Girl with a sense of, isn't it good that the story is being told, I was ignorant of the fact that now is the time to get to work. Chu wrote, I'm haunted by the possibility, something I hear from my trans friends all the time as a complaint, that consuming works of art about trans characters and boosting trans celebrities and making trans issues visible on social media may, in the long run, bend the arc of history towards justice. But in the short run, it is making trans people's everyday lives harder. Day-to-day reality continues to be difficult. I mean, here are just a few of the statistics that haven't changed much. These are about 2 years old, but they're pretty close to the statistics I've heard recently. This is from the National Center for Transgender Equality. Transgender people are 4 times more likely to live in poverty. Transgender people experience twice as much unemployment, and if there are transgender people of color, 4 times more unemployment. 90% of transgender people report experiencing harassment, mistreatment, or discrimination on the job. 22% of respondents who have interacted with police reported harassment from police, much higher for people of color. While only 1.6% of the entire population attempts suicide, 40% of transgender people report attempting suicide. And transgender people, particularly women of color, face a shockingly high rate of murder. So for many, the goal is not visibility, it's survival. I know this in Baltimore in particular, where I've worked a little more on this issue. I'd like to do more here. But for 3 years, I've spoken at the National Transgender Day of Remembrance at the First Unitarian Church, just down the street from the Ethical Society in Baltimore, where I serve as well. And what happens there is the names of transgender people who have been killed in the last year are read off, and for each one a candle is put, and it goes on for way too long. By the time the last candle is put in, some of the first candles have burnt all the way down. It's a sobering ceremony that tries to bring light into this darkness, but it's up to us to transform the sadness and the grief and the anger into hope and change and justice for everyone. And this will not occur easily, but it is made easier by trailblazing activists. I want to tell a story about one person, Phyllis Randolph Fry. Now, back in the 70s, Philip Fry was struggling with his increasingly greater sense of transgender identity. When he was in the military, he made a good faith effort to be cured through drug therapy, hypnosis, and aversion therapy, during which he was induced to vomit while handling women's underwear. This ugly and unproven therapy did not work and damages people all the time. He was forced to resign from the military. He was disowned by his parents, divorced by his wife, separated from his son, fired from numerous engineering jobs, and he tried to slit his wrists before eventually accepting his own transgender identity. But her own self-acceptance brought a broader social backlash, because when she went out and explained to her neighbors, her house was egged, her tires were slashed, and graffiti was spray painted. Nevertheless, she became a transgender activist. She identified as a transgenderist, which for her meant embracing the gender opposite of their anatomy without surgery. She moved to Houston, began organizing annual transgender law conferences, waged a battle against the Houston Ordinance against cross-dressing. She attended law school at the University of Houston, and soon, because of an online chat room called the Gazebo, a national transgender movement began to gel. An international bill of gender rights was proclaimed, saying all human beings have the right to define their own gender identity, regardless of chromosomal sex, genitalia, assigned birth sex, or initial gender role. She was admitted into the Texas bar, and Ms. Fry began representing transgender clients in name change and discrimination cases, and before long, power was beginning to be gained by the transgender community. In this century, Fry has worked to try to get more mainstream groups to include transgender issues, like the Human Rights Campaign. In 2008, still resisting taking up transgender causes, the HRC excluded transgender people from the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, and that was the last straw. So Fry and other activists began to hammer. And just 2 years ago, the president of the Human Rights Commission, Chad Griffin, admitted, quote, HRC has done wrong by the transgender community, and soon transgender people felt more part of the broader LGBTQ activism. Still a lot of work to do. For Phyllis Fry, who became the first openly transgender judge, all while living in Texas, of all places, she marshals her faith and her hope and her energy and helped make our nation safer for my child. My greatest hope lies in our children, because they teach more than anything. There was a recent op-ed by a woman named Marlo Mack, I hope I don't get choked up on this story so moved me, who told of her 2-year-old child, labeled male at birth, but already insisting she was a girl. She remembers her daughter saying, Mama, something went wrong when I was in your tummy when I came out as a boy instead of a girl. She asked for girls' clothing and for dolls. And Marlo, thinking it was just a phase, went to counselors who just threw up their hands and didn't know what to tell her. So she tried to convince her son that he was a boy. And one Christmas, Marlo went out and got her son trucks, sports equipment. But then that Christmas, when he was sitting, saying, "Didn't Santa get my letter?" in tears, Mac was determined not to break her child's heart again. And she had a daughter. So soon, Marlo found these studies that began to show, and these are fairly recent studies, that transgender children come to realize their identity often at very early ages, and that they develop self-assured senses of identity. This new therapeutic advice says that the number one factor in a healthy child, you can guess, for their mental health and self-confidence, supportive parents. A supportive home. Marlo supported her daughter. Her daughter went on to be great at school, socially confident. They lived in a supportive, tightly knit community with other transgender children that helped. And when Mac went to an activist speaking out on transgender rights, she said she felt chills when the activist said, "The world is watching your children. They're the first generation of kids to be allowed to live in another gender. Your children are making history." They are. And they're teaching their parents about human nature, love, community. They're teaching their parents and their counselors that it's the world, not the children, that have a problem with transgender. The senior medical journalist for Reuters and the ethics committee chairperson for the Society of Professional Journalists explained that transgender children aren't confused about their identity. Transgender children in healthy environments are as clear and content with their sexual identity as cisgender children. He said, quote, "The cognitions around gender aren't as fixed as we'd like to think they are, particularly for kids. Gender isn't always fixed, and the sooner we understand that, the more compassionate, ethical, and vibrant our world will be." So what should parents do? Approach gender from a place of curiosity. Be open. Listen. Be supportive. Parental home support is the number one determiner of outcomes. Don't forget that. What can we do? We also can support transgender people by being curious and open and humble. We can learn and listen. What can we learn? I mean, it can be confusing. The language changes every year. We know that. But we can know the language better. We can understand that identity is who I self-identify as. And orientation is who I am attracted to. Know that difference. Know the difference between cisgendered, somebody who identifies with what they were assigned at birth, and transgender, somebody who does not identify with what they were assigned at birth. Understand that transgender is an umbrella term, and there are many other terms with subtle and important differences under it that I urge you to learn. And most of all, let's be patient with ourselves and with other people about learning this language. We have to be patient with unlearning time-honored traditions. We're just beginning this exploration of gender and sexuality. Language is always going to shift under our feet, but isn't it better to adopt language to fit human needs than to have language dictate how we live our lives? One last example. Take writer Michelle T. She got married and her ceremony ended not with the traditional "I now pronounce you man and wife," or even the more contemporary options of wife and wife, or husband and husband, or spouse and spouse. The ceremony concluded with the words, "I now pronounce you married." And it was because in some ways, Michelle explained, "My brand new spouse is not a man. She looks like a man, though, much more than she resembles a woman. She's lanky and lean. She wears button-down shirts and dress pants. To get radical academia about it, she's genderqueer, or gender variant, or gender nonconforming. all of which fall into the roomy transgender basket. But out in the real world, it was hard for them to get the language right with other people. Michelle's spouse's family called her Auntie Michelle, and that worked great for her, because she identified that way. But for her spouse, Auntie didn't work, and neither did wife. Michelle wrote, "I can't just refer to her as her name, while she is that. She is now the person I'm married to. And this is novel and exciting, and I want to refer to her as much as possible that way. But my wife? How ridiculous. It serves to feminize her. And feminizing genderqueer females has the exact effect of feminizing men. It makes the individual feel uneasy and embarrassed and misunderstood." End quote. So given Michelle's spouse's genderqueer presentation, they eventually found a term that worked for both of them. Michelle was married to her husband wife. And the more they just used the term, the less jokey it got, she said. And why not? Language should serve human needs, not the other way around, right? Michelle's now seeking in vitro fertilization, and she says, once that baby comes, we're going to have to figure out what that child will call his mom-dad. So if non-traditional couples struggle to find the right language, it's no wonder that a cisgendered heterosexual male struggles too. It's no wonder that we all struggle. Of course we do. But this struggle is important. Educating ourselves is liberating. It can even be joyous and fun if we let it be. Because at root, it's about integrity and respect. So when you speak to transgender people, speak to them as whole people, not just opportunities to learn. Listen. Build trust. And then maybe ask permission to ask questions. When appropriate, ask them what pronouns they prefer. Is it he, him, and his? Or she, her, and hers? Is the plural used as a singular, such as indicating a single person by they or them? Or is it Z, another term? As in Z goes to the Ethical Society. Appreciate that intimate questions about sexual anatomy and surgical procedures are only appropriate in certain settings, usually in a close relationship or a relationship with a doctor or surgeon, right? There are plenty of books you can read about this if you don't have personal relationships with any of the over 700,000 transgender people in this country. No one person can speak for all humans, so no transgender person can speak for all transgender people. So respect the diversity within the groups that we label. That's a learning experience. And reflect the values of ethical culture in your relationship. Put at the center of your thought and your behavior the uniqueness of every person, transgender or otherwise, of being irreplaceable and of inherent worth. We ethical humanists should lead the way in working through the power dynamics and the interpersonal communication so we bring out the best of everyone in this country. There's a lot to learn. There's a generation of millennials and their children teaching us, and the best thing we can do in response is to be good students and be allies in gender justice. Thank you.